Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Hello, and glad you could make it. I'm Crystal Tanner, and welcome to our symphonic summary of Station 11. That is a lot of S's. Today we will be giving you all the must-knows on Station 11, but be warned, we will only speak what we feel and not what we ought to say. There's a little King Lear reference that's been hidden in there. If you read the book or know the book, you would understand that one. Okay, now let's get into what you actually want to talk about, the book. I want you to imagine, well, for those of you in 2020, imagine 2020. And for those of you not in 2020, imagine a world where your life is suddenly struck by a raging virus. It creates mass chaos. Death and destruction ensue. No flights, no work, no human contact. No more cities, no more countries, no certainty of surviving. Published in 2014, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. That is a long last name. Wow. Begins by opening onto a production of King Lear by Shakespeare, starring Arthur Leander, who eventually becomes a very significant character. And if you thought a Shakespeare play could not get any more dramatic or include any more deaths, just you wait, because a death occurs on stage. And I'm not talking about in the play, an actual. This then leads into the Georgia flu. Now, the flu very quickly turns into a major pandemic. It kills millions within weeks. 20 years later, after economic collapse and desolation occurs, not so great, the audience begins following the story of Kirsten Raymond and the Traveling Symphony. Raymond and the Traveling Symphony travel around from town to town, attempting to survive what's left of North America while performing Shakespeare and old classic songs at the same time. Now one day, the Traveling Symphony begins disappearing randomly, and Kirsten and August, who's a member of the Traveling Symphony, are the only two left. So they begin searching and traveling in hopes of finding the Traveling Symphony again, as well as discovering the Severn City Airport, which is an extremely important location. Pay attention to that one. Along the way, as you're reading and as the characters are going throughout their stories, both readers and characters will find much more surprises than what they were planning on, as well as a lot more than what was expected and along the surface. Such as, who is the prophet? And what's the importance of one single object?
Hey, I'm Mallory, the person talking about the book after Crystal. Now that you know more about what actually happens in Station 11, we can dive deeper into analyzing all of those key plot points. I first want to talk about the analysis of the book as a whole. Mandel is really specific when it comes to the workings of the book, so general analysis is going to be a little difficult. That being said, I think we can do it. The book seems to take a commentary and society type of stance when reading it, from everything falling because of a virus and the wide types of reactions to the way the symphony groups together. It's important to note that Mandel seems to think that people are somehow all interconnected in one way or another. We see this towards the end of the book when all of our main characters can be seen having some sort of interaction with each other at the airport. As much as I don't want this to sound like your stereotypical English analysis essay, this alone does in fact get us to our thesis statement. Mandel in Station 11 pushes the idea that every person in a similar situation is connected somehow through the use of her characters and situations. That's a mouthful. And now that we know what the overall idea is, let's get a little more detailed about what actually is going on. Okay, maybe a lot more detailed. I kind of have a lot of things to look at. First of all, the very first scene of the book, Arthur is performing the Nice on stage, Jeevan has to perform CPR, everyone in the theater starts freaking out, that whole thing. So I think it's fairly safe to assume that Arthur is our first case of the Georgia flu. Although his case seems like a sudden erratic thing that happened out of nowhere, we know as we continue reading that this isn't exactly what happened. Foreshadowing crazy. I'm pretty sure Crystal said earlier, the story follows a symphony of people made up of musicians and actors. It may seem like a totally random group of people to follow in the event of things at first glance, but Mandel was very specific in what her storyline looked like. We mainly follow around Kristen Raymond in this story. First seen about having a heart attack herself after Arthur died in the very first scene of the novel. I mean, pretty sure she just witnessed her first death, so pretty understandable. However, what I really want to get into is how this shapes Kristen as a character. Kristen. We can see later in the novel that Kristen definitely isn't, to say the very least, the same little girl she was that night. From breaking into random abandoned houses to literally killing people, she becomes a lot more like your stereotypical apocalypse survivor. Does this mean she went around killing zombies and ravaging stores for whatever leftover canned goods they had? Well, no. Again, think 2020, not The Walking Dead. Rather, Kristen did what she needed in order to keep herself connected. I know you're probably thinking, Mallory, what are you talking about? Isn't the entire point of living through a pandemic trying to keep yourself as far away from people as possible? Well, yeah. But we're all craving human connection, aren't we? Whether we like to admit it or not. Station 11 takes place in a place and time where rules can be broken. After all, most times that's what happens in a dystopian novel. Rules are broken, people rebel in some way. Basics, people, basics. Analysis in short, Kristen's lonely but doesn't want to admit it, commenting on society's innate need to be with other people. We see this through her connection with the symphony.
Hi there, I'm Logan. Now that you've heard about all the boring parts, let's move on to the meaning of Station 11. Living in the year 2020, this novel hits close to home. Every town the Traveling Symphony visits has less than 50 occupants. They are basically living in total isolation. We lived in isolation from the outside world for months, being stuck in our homes, losing the chance to meet people and just live. Station 11 ties us back to the world at the beginning of 2020, the first 7 months or so to be exact. For most of us, it was uncharted territory. We had no clue what to do or how to react. Kristen Raymond experienced the start of the Georgia flu at the age of 8 years old. She watched as the world she knew fell apart at the seams, knowing nothing was going to be the same again. Emily St. John Mandel took it upon herself to write a piece of dystopian literature that depicts what the world could be if we didn't take care of it or if we didn't take care of ourselves. The population in every town in the whole country dwindled down to merely nothing. A population so small that you wouldn't run into anyone for miles. Throughout the course of the text, we learn that Kirsten has not one but 2 tattoos. Survival is insufficient. A quote originally from Star Trek is tattooed on her left forearm. But what is the meaning of these words in the world they live in? In a world where they have to survive. Insufficiency to survive is often the mindset that some of the symphony members carry. They are together, but they are not. They disagree, but they think the same. The members of the Traveling Symphony may be a dysfunctional bunch, but you can see just how much they care about each other based on how they interact with one another. On the back of her right wrist, Kirsten has 2 knives drawn on her skin. Each knife represents a life she has ended. For anyone, taking a life isn't easy. You'll carry that burden with you for the remainder of your days, and there's no telling how you'll react. Everyone's story is connected. The people you meet are a part of who you are as a person. Kirsten and the Traveling Symphony have made it their mission to travel to the Severn City Airport. Even though they get separated at one point, they reconnect at the airport. Clark Thompson, the curator of the Museum of Civilization, found in the Sky Miles Lodge, recognizes and remembers Kirsten from an interview published in a newspaper in year 15. Kirsten and Clark are more similar than they initially believed. They both knew Arthur Leander, the man who unfortunately died of a heart attack on the night the world changed forever. Someone they knew 20 years ago, who was a part of both stories, ultimately brought them together. Emily St. John Mandel conveyed that each individual you meet has a story of their own that almost always circles back to yours.
Finally, I'm Alex, and I'd like to share the conclusion of the work as a whole. When first tasked to read a dystopian novel, the question that came up was, why? Why read about a crumbling society threatened by the flu and mass death? One may suggest that this could hit a little too close to home. After all, our daily lives have changed so much this past year. Reading is meant to be an escape from reality, a separation of their world and ours. So why would it make sense to escape to this novel when it closely parallels the truth we're living in? Well, I think it really boils down to reassurance within the reader. In this fictional apocalyptic setting, it is easy to see and reflect on our own world and think that it couldn't possibly get this bad. As with this book and our current lives, we will see things in two parts, before and after. Before the days of COVID-19 and in the book, The Georgia Flu, we can see what daily life was like, and then after, the chaos and new world that we're living in. That may make us humans seem like monsters. Thanks for listening to our symphonic summary of Station 11. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe.